We are now
Oh
in
yeah, look, there's some.
record mode. Yay.
All right, welcome. Thanks for coming, everyone. This is a pretty good turnout. You know, Fairfield can be. Who knows how people are able to make it. So my name is Jaime Betters. Maybe I'll just start with a little. What'd you say, Sean?
I said, you know, it's snack.
We like our snacks. So just a little bit about me. My name is Jaime Betters. I'm a registered dietitian and diabetes educator, and I'm also certified in plant-based nutrition. So this is a huge passion for me. And I've been here at Kaiser for 14 years, but for about the last 5 years, I've been teaching plant-based nutrition workshops for Napa Solano here in Fairfield mostly. And I get the privilege of co-teaching a series class with Dr. Levy out of Vallejo, and we recently expanded to Vacaville too. So I have a support group for plant-based nutrition, all kinds of fun stuff. And the reason that Andy, I think, invited me to come and speak with you guys is to just sort of talk about how to gear your meal planning more towards plant-based or plant-focused, plant-centric, find a terminology that feels inviting to you. I don't want you guys to see this as a black and white all or nothing, there's no good foods, no bad foods, only foods that are bad or foods that are spoiled and need to go in the trash kind of thing. But really looking at foods as whether they're disease preventive or disease promoting, whether they're more nourishing, less nourishing, kind of using more objective vocabulary with it, I think can sometimes help if you're a person who has the tendency to think about foods in extremes, right? Like you're on a diet or off a diet. So just watch your speech this next 21 days. Don't refer to meals that are not plant-based as cheat meals. Don't say good or bad, that kind of stuff. Just you had something that was not plant-based or you ate plant-based. It's that simple. But the goal and heart of this is to help our staff as well as educating our patients. And I have a cool patient story to share with you. But about the benefits of eating plant-centric or even 100% plant-based. I started teaching these classes because about 5+ years ago, our cardiology department in Vallejo started sending patients to me asking for plant-based diets as an adjunctive treatment for their cardiovascular. And so I really wanted to provide a service that patients could learn about this lifestyle and how to eat this way. And it was very exciting to see that Kaiser was promoting using food medicinally this way. And so we came out with a plant-based booklet back in 2013, and we've written about plant-based diets and various benefits of them in the Permanente Journal probably a half a dozen times since 2013. Great articles. And so that's kind of in a nutshell what brings me here today to introduce to you guys this concept of plant-based or plant-centric eating, provide some meal planning tools and recipe ideas, things that I've created. All of these are things that I've made over the years to help people incorporate more whole plant foods into their meal plan. So just out of curiosity, has anyone ever tried plant-based eating before? That's okay. I'm sure that every time you try, there's one or two changes that stick, right? That you kind of continue to roll forward with. So one of the handouts that I created there is called 12 Steps Towards Plant-Based, or Eating Plant-Based in 12 Steps, I think I've titled it. And if we can start on the back of that handout, actually, the back of this one has some great tools and strategies before you even shop, covering some of the basic things, like making sure that you have space in your fridge and pantries and things like that. Coming home from the grocery store with a huge haul of food and nowhere to put it's a little frustrating. And also having the right containers. And then also having the right equipment. So investing in some Tupperware containers, the glass ones, if you like, the glass is fine. They're great for reheating. Plastic ones can work okay too, especially if you're just storing fresh produce in them. I do personally use the Ziploc bags, but I understand plastic's not for everyone. There's other options out there. But putting freshly washed and, if you have a salad spinner, your greens, chopped kale, things like that, you can literally get 10 days of life out of your freshly washed greens and produce if you do it at home. If you buy the pre-bagged lettuces, which are totally an option, they're fine too. But I think a lot of us have experienced where we open up the bag and it's already like, we're not going to be able to eat out of this for more than like 1 or 2 salads because it already smells a little off. So by doing it at home, you get a lot more longevity out of your produce. And then there's a couple of my favorite kitchen appliances, like my salad spinner, my blender, food processor. None of these things are mandatory, but they've just really been helpful in my journey with plant-based eating. And so I wanted to suggest them to you guys. And then identifying a time to shop. That is important because failing to plan is planning to fail, right? There's that catchphrase. And I think that if we don't have it mentally budgeted into our week of when am I going to go to the store, when can I carve out maybe 30 minutes? Sorry, I'm getting feedback. Yeah. Good question. So it's picture it like a strainer inside of a bigger bowl, and then it has a lid you put on that you either pump or turn, and it's like the inside of your washer machine. It spins out the excess moisture. They're super affordable. You can find them at Bed Bath Beyond, Target, like anywhere that has those types of kitchen appliances. Yeah, so if you just were to rinse it and then put it in a container and it's really got a lot of moisture, water droplets on it, that will mold and spoil pretty quickly. But if you use a salad spinner, it will get all the big water droplets off, but it will keep enough moisture on it that when you put it in a Ziploc bag, let's say, it's humid, so it stays really crisp the whole time it's in there. But yeah, I do. I put dry paper towel. Exactly. I usually line mine with a dry paper towel so that any big water droplets get absorbed, but it keeps it like a greenhouse type environment. And I'm telling you, I still have kale in my fridge that I washed like 5 days ago. It's beautiful. And I get to go home every night and just grab a handful or two and use it however I want. And that means that every time then that you want to use salad or kale or something, you're not having to wash it and deal with it every time. So it increases the likelihood that you'll eat more vegetables throughout the week. So if you bring home, I love shopping at Costco, but it's a lot of food. Yeah. So the sweet peppers or the cucumbers, you can cut those into spears, the cucumbers for hummus, or cut the bell peppers into different shapes for dipping, for sauteing, and put them in Tupperware containers. And that way, when you want to throw together a healthy stir fry, all the chopping and the prep has been done. Because mentally, that's one of the biggest obstacles I find with my patients is they're like, I don't have the time. I'm in the kitchen chopping everything all the time. Well, if you're going to go chop vegetables once for a salad, you might as well just take an extra 10 minutes and chop enough that you can put them in containers. And then if you want to make a salad, you bring them all out on your counter and it's like a salad bar. Or you can actually pre-make several salads, which is probably one of my greatest tricks that I do every week. I make like 5 to 7 salads at a time. And then I eat them throughout the week. I come home from work and I've already got food in the fridge waiting for me. Because that time, I will admit that plant-based eating is a lot of chopping, a lot of time spent prepping things to eat fresh does take a little bit more of a time investment. But if you can carve out that shopping pocket of time and then a little bit of prep on the tail end of it or at another time of the week, you won't be throwing away as much produce. You'll be eating it throughout the week. And then anything that you don't think you'll get through in time, throw it in a Ziploc bag and freeze it. I put cucumbers in my smoothies. Any fruits that I don't think I'm going to eat up, I freeze them and put those in smoothies. It either way is fine. Sometimes frozen fruit is more accessible, and you can get blueberries like in winter that still actually taste good frozen. So it depends on what's in season. But yeah, either way is fine. No, you're fine. You can find me. My last name's Betters, first name Jaime, so you can find me on that.
We also have Facebook group questions. Okay. Our plant-based group, you can say wellness questions. We can
and on my handout, my name is on there, so you can.
Perfect.
Thanks for coming. So kind of covering your basics, that's really important. Getting the right containers, making sure you know when you're going to grocery shop, that really sets you up to be successful. Then if you're ready to go all in, I have my 5-step meal planning tool that we'll go over in a second, but if you flip this handout over, it has going plant-based in 12 steps. So tackling this often just one step at a time. The first step is the most enjoyable, where you add fruit to every meal. A lot of people really like that idea. They already love fruit, but it's not a common practice to have fruit with dinner for most people, or even lunch for that matter. They often think of fruit as a breakfast and sometimes as a snack. But if you get in the habit of adding it to every meal, this is about creating long-term sustainable change, and it can satisfy that craving for something sweet if you're having it along with your dinner, and that can keep you from looking for something afterwards, right? The cookies or the whatever you might have at home. And then the second step would be, adding vegetables to every lunch and dinner. So you kind of tackle these one at a time until they start to feel like a new habit. This is one approach for people who just don't feel ready to go all in, because even if we just look at the basic healthy eating guidelines for Americans, it includes eating 5 to 9 servings of fruits and vegetables a day. So that's a fruit with breakfast, lunch, dinner, veggies with lunch, veggies with dinner. That's going to get us our 5. So this is also just helping to break in some really basic healthy eating habits. And then I won't go through all 12 of those steps, but the first 9 are all about adding. And the reason why I did that is because far too often when people are trying to make healthy change, or whether it be for weight loss, health improvement, whatever, they often think about what? All the things they're not supposed to eat. And that mentality of restriction and deprivation is what's not sustainable for most people. So I wanted to create a tool that said, okay, for right now, leave the entree alone. Because let's be real, for most of us who grew up in a animal product focused meal plan, what is the first thing you think of when you go, what am I going to cook tonight for dinner? You think, what meat do I have? Do I have chicken? Am I going to thaw that out? What am I going to do? And then we build from there. And the second thing we usually think of is the starch. And if we don't have anything else, we've got a meal. Spaghetti and meatballs, sandwiches, chicken and rice, right? Steak and potatoes. So if we've got that protein and that starch, we've got a meal. So what I have experienced with people over the years is when they immediately say, I can't have meat anymore, now when they think about what they're going to do for dinner, it's a totally blank slate. They are like, I don't even know. Like, I've had patients tell me they went in the grocery store super excited to start this way of eating. And then we're looking around. The first thing you see, when you walk in most stores is like Trader Joe's. The meat is right there. And then the cheese. And then, and then they're going, I'm not supposed to have that. I'm not supposed to have that. I'm not supposed to have that. And I've had people tell me they've left the store in tears going, I don't even know what to buy. I don't know how to cook. And I'm like, oh, no, that's not how I want you to feel. So I designed this tool with the idea of abundance and variety in mind, that for right off the bat, don't change the main entree, right? Like, that's been ingrained. That's something that y'all have been doing for years and decades. Just keep the entree in place, but let's start layering in more whole plant foods to the landscape of the meal. And then by the time you get to that 9th step and you go into step 10, then you start replacing and reducing. But when you've got in the habit of eating fruit at every meal, veggies, 1 cooked, 1 raw, having legumes, beans, peas, and lentils, eating more whole grains, suddenly not having the chicken breast doesn't seem like a huge deal. Not cooking the steak or the shrimp or whatever, because you've added so much volume and variety. Does that make sense? So this tool can be a really great starting point for people. If you feel more ready to jump right into plant-based eating, then look at the blueberries handout. That's my plant-based meal planning tool. So that starts with a list of color-coded options, choosing foods. The green list are the foods that you can eat in unlimited quantities. So it has obvious things on there like your vegetables, but it also includes things like fruit and starchy vegetables, which surprises people. But let me tell you this really cool story. Earlier this morning, I taught my monthly plant-based nutrition workshop, and a gentleman came who I had met with individually less than 2 weeks ago, introduced the idea of plant-based eating to improve his diabetes, weight, and other health conditions. He's very motivated to try it. His wife has been trying to eat plant-based for a long time, but they were having trouble getting on the same page. And I explained the benefits and the importance of low-fat, whole food, plant-based eating for diabetes. Anyways, he took me up on the offer and he came in today and said that within 2 days, he was off of his insulin. His blood sugars that were always up over 200 are now down around 110. He's eating more carbs than he ever has. And this is a person who's had a history of calorie restricted diet, strict portion control. It was all about calories in, calories out, which is one of my least favorite messages about weight management, by the way. It's more complicated than that. And he can sit down to abundant volume. He's like, I often feel like my wife's serving me too much food. And I'm like, you're overfeeding me. And 7 pounds down already within the first 10 days or so. And so already starting to see these huge changes and improvements in health. And that isn't going to be how everyone's story goes. But the goal with this and how Kaiser's intention to use this, what Kaiser's intention for this is to improve, stabilize, and maybe even reverse chronic disease. I've always seen patients have improvement with their disease. Some of my patients have full-blown reversed things like diabetes, high blood pressure. You know, I see a lot of GI improvements with eating this way, but there is always going to be some degree of improvement. But it is like medicine. The more you do it, the more you'll see that change and that improvement. This individual is really only about 80% right now plant-based and still seeing such drastic results in health and weight. So it again doesn't have to be an all or nothing scenario. Any questions so far? You guys doing okay?
So I'm going to open up the line now. And I did mention this before, but if you have joined us, all of these handouts will be emailed immediately after, since we weren't sure to join us. And how do you? Oh. All right, I believe everyone is unmuted. If anyone on the call has questions. You could also chat. You could type a chat into the bar, and we will reply to that when we have little breaks. So this is the first time we've done a group call on Teams. So thank you for being patient. This is good technology, and we look forward to doing it more.
It looks like it might be.
I think they have voluntarily.
Oh, maybe you guys have muted on your
So
end.
we'll
Okay.
just
Yeah.
open it up for questions another time.
Yeah, and Andy, well, one of us will keep an eye if questions pop up. We'll stop. Gab, because I'm a talker. So the way that this meal planning tool works is the color coded. The green list is you can basically have as much as you want from those foods. A couple of the caveats that people always have questions about is in the fruits category, how come dates, durian, and avocado are not there, or they're not in the green category? It has to do with the fat content of those foods. That's the same story with soybeans. All of your legumes, beans, peas, and lentils are eat as much as you want. But an interesting fact about soybeans is that about 38% of their calories are from fat, whereas other beans are only about 3%. So if we're looking at improving insulin resistance, which is a huge part of why a lot of my patients are going plant-based, the fat really does need to be kept at a certain level of the diet. And so some of those high-fat foods are put in that yellow list. The yellow list are foods you can still have every day. You can even have 1 to 2 servings per meal. They're just not foods we say, whatever, eat as much as you want, it's totally fine. But everyday consumption is still fine from that list. So that's where you're going to find your nuts, your seeds, avocados, flour-based whole grain products like whole grain pastas, breads, and things like that. And then the red list is foods that you want to minimize or avoid altogether. So this is where all of your meat and animal-based products, animal product and byproduct, and all processed foods are going to be found, like white flour, sugars, and oils. Now notice though at the top it says avoid or minimize, uses an accent. So that verbiage is really important because again, some people do fine with, I'm just going to jump all in and that's my personality. If I don't do it 100% for at least 30 days, I won't do it at all. That's fine. But other people are like, anything you tell me I can't have, I'm going to want to eat more of. So I'm like, okay, then don't choose that all or nothing approach. You can start to really experience the food that you're eating. think of it with all of your senses. We get to engage with food with all 5 senses. We see it, smell it, touch it, hear it, taste it. So we are to enjoy the process of self-nourishment. It's an extension of self-care. It's perfectly fine to love food. I love food. But I find a lot of people are eating things out of habit or tradition that they're like, I could take it or leave it. Like I put hard-boiled eggs on my salad because I thought I needed to for protein. I'm just as happy with garbanzo beans. Cool. Then get the eggs out of the salad and just use the garbanzo beans. But there are going to be those products where you just feel like I am not, if you tell me I can never, ever again have X, Y, or Z, I'm not doing this. Then those would be the things that you want to keep as an accenting role to the meal plan. Yes, use it as a condiment once you get to that place where it's a side dish. I haven't. He says, have you ever used the, and then he put a link, it's 4leafsurvey.com to estimate or track the % of calories from plants. I actually wasn't even aware of that tool, so thank you.
So
That would be super fun. Yeah. Yeah, thank you for that. That's really cool. Because this, according to standard American diet percentages, only about 12% of our diet comes from plants, and that's a little questionable because half of it can be like the almonds in a candy bar or the apples in an apple pie. It's like, so it would be really cool to track and see how much. So even if you downloaded a tool like that and you just incrementally started increasing the percentage of your diet coming from plants, it's all about taking steps in a better and different direction. So, sorry, back to that meal planning tool. We got the green, yellow, and red list. Does that make sense to you guys? Okay. Yeah, Shani.
So does it make a difference, or is it one better than the beans and the peas and lentils, or to be like the dry beans and actually cook them, or is it okay to have like canned
It's a great question.
Frozen peas?
Frozen's absolutely fine. Canned is also absolutely fine. Just watch what may have been added. So sometimes frozen vegetables will come with a little nuggets of sauce that, you know, thaw out when you cook it. That's probably going to add a lot of sodium to the vegetables, might even add a decent amount of fat. But if it's just flash frozen vegetables, they're actually sometimes even more nutritious than fresh, depending on, you know, fresh is, the hierarchy is usually fresh, then frozen, then canned, but it depends on if it's local and in season, right? So when we're eating tomatoes in January that are grown and shipped to us from Mexico, they're actually picked when they're green. They're not even mature as a tomato. They don't have the same nutritional properties as a ripe tomato. And then they're sprayed with a gas to turn them red, and that's why they don't have any flavor. And they're like, eh. So in that case, eating canned tomatoes or, you know, other versions of tomatoes is actually a better option. So just watch any additives. And then canned beans, I use them all the time. You can look for the no salt versions, but even if you buy whole canned beans that have some salt, the amount of sodium per serving is really negligible. It's like 80 milligrams. And even on a sodium controlled or low sodium diet, we usually tell people about 500 to 700 milligrams of sodium per meal. So now if you have a point of reference, you look at a label and you're like, oh, 80, that's not a big deal. But if you don't know how much sodium you can have, everything with sodium seems like a problem, right? So it's a really good question. I use canned beans all the time. I have a pressure cooker, but I don't always have time to use it. So if I didn't do canned beans, I probably would never have beans on my salad or mixing in beans with rice or something like that. That's a really good question. So then the next page in that handout is a shopping list. And I color-coded that shopping list, and I omitted all of the red items just to make it a little easier for you guys. Of course, you can add any of those red items to your list, you know, your favorite things that you just don't feel ready to let go of. But it's broken down by food groups. So it has your whole grains first, then your starchy veggies, then your proteins, non-starchy veggies, fruits, etc. And does that part make sense so far? So along that same lines of the question that Sean asked, I'm going to pull out a couple labels here. Notice in the whole grains column, I have dry or frozen. Sometimes people are like, frozen? What are you talking about? A lot of grocery stores have these great options for frozen, cooked, whole grains. And these are another thing that people feel, is this okay? Because it seems really convenient. And I think we've associated convenience with highly processed, too much sodium, all that. And sometimes that's true, but it's getting pretty sophisticated now. And this, for example, well, I'll have Andy read the ingredients on that guy there.
So here is our item. Standard Joe's organic brown rice. The only ingredient is organic brown rice.
There's no sodium, there's nothing added. This one's the same. It's like a blend of different grains, and it just simply says cooked whole grain brown rice, sweet brown rice, red rice, and whole grain black barley. That's it. So they did the work of cooking it, they flash froze it, put it in bags. It's in the freezer section. It's a little higher price point, but it's worth the time that it saves, in my opinion. I keep these in my freezer all the time. So that's what that means on the shopping list. You can buy these frozen. And then on the next page, you have a 5-step meal planning guide. And this is the one that I want you to have kind of cemented in your thought process. So the first thing I want you to think about when you're going to plan a meal is what's going to be my whole grain and or starchy vegetable. If you can't remember what's a whole grain and what's a starchy veggie, flip back to that shopping list because it's in that same terminology. This is really hard for a lot of my patients to embrace because they're like, wait a minute, you want me to focus on the starch first? And I'm like, yes, because this is a low-fat, whole food, plant-based eating plan. Our body has trouble using carbohydrates appropriately when our diet is high in fat and animal protein over a long period of time. When you start lowering the fat, as the gentleman in my class noticed, his blood sugars immediately responded. His insulin resistance started to reverse in a matter of days, and he's eating more carbohydrates than he ever has, and his blood sugars are better. There is so much more to the diabetes story than carb counting. And it's unfortunate to me that most patients with blood sugar management conditions, any form of diabetes, are always being told, cut back on carbs, eat less carbs, and being told to eat more protein and vegetables, because over time, that animal protein, and if they're eating fatty sources, it makes insulin resistance worse over time. And it's hard on the kidneys. It can start to dysregulate the types of bacteria growing in the gut, which can lead to GI issues. It's hard on bone health. It creates an acidic environment systemically in the body. It is not a good trade-off for long-term health, even though it might provide a temporary reduction in blood sugar. So there's a lot more to the diabetes story than just carbohydrates. And when we keep fat appropriate and we aren't using animal protein excessively, the body becomes more sensitive to carbohydrates and we can eat a lot more of them. So that's why they're first. The other reason they're first is because these foods provide energy and satiety. You will not feel satisfied with plant-based or plant-focused eating if you're hungry an hour after every meal. That doesn't work for anyone. So it has to be a starch-centric or carbohydrate-focused way of eating. Then the second thing you layer in is your protein. Ideally, this should be beans, peas, or lentils most of the time, though there is some room for transitional products. What I mean by that is transitional products that we say can be an option would be like veggie burger things that are made with whole food ingredients. So if I read the ingredients on this guy, it's carrots, onions, string beans, oat bran, soybeans, zucchini. It's like you could make this at home if you wanted to. What I want you to steer clear from using excessively, it doesn't mean you can never have it, but these types of meat substitutions, remember that we're trying to emphasize whole foods, but these often do the trick when you're looking for something meaty in a dish. Like this one here from Trader Joe's. When my husband lets me plan his lunches plant-based, he loves when I make burrito bowls with this. But what do? I add black beans, pinto beans, corn, green chili, fresh like the pico de gallo salsa. I bulk it out with loads of whole plant foods, right? I'm not just cooking this like a ground beef and filling tacos with it. So again, you want to see how can I take something that may be a little more highly processed, but it gives me that satisfaction of a meat experience that I'm looking for, but how can I add more whole foods to it to make it more nutritious and higher in fiber? So that's sort of the trick with those transitional products, as I call them. Then you layer in your vegetables. All right, so all is unlimited amounts. We want you having as much vegetables as you can fit into that meal. I just don't want the vegetables replacing the starch and the grain. I don't want number 3 replacing number 1 on that meal planning tool regularly. Once in a while, it can happen. But you will start to notice if you undereat carbs for a long period of time. It's more than just about hunger. You'll get hungry, but you can start to have dysregulated sleep cycles, your mood, you're more irritable. Carbohydrates help with serotonin production, and that regulates mood, appetite, and sleep. So low carbing it for a long period of time, nobody around you loves it when we do that. So we're like, why are you so crabby? And then add a fruit to your meal is number 4. And step number 5 is accent with some fats. Try to keep the fats whole food based as much as possible, nuts, seeds, avocados, and olives. And I've given parameters for kind of how to use those, like a sprinkle of 1 to 3 teaspoons of nuts or seeds on a salad, a quarter of an avocado on a sandwich. Yes?
So, question, a serving of a fruit. So if you get like an apple, I was told half of that is 1 serving.
So it depends on the size. Costco size apples, that might be the case. But if it's around the size of your fist or a tennis ball, that's about a serving. But there really is no upper limit to how much fruit a person can have. So even if you're having, it turns out to be 2 servings in a meal, it's totally fine. Don't worry about that. Yeah. But I know it just depends on how ginormous. It's like Costco bananas versus real bananas. Good question. She asked how big a serving of fruit was. Sorry if you guys missed that. Any other questions? Is that meal planning, the 5 steps? Does that make sense to you guys? Okay. Then the next page is the plate method, a visual. Now you will notice that most other plate methods, half the plate is what? If anyone's familiar with those other plate methods. Vegetables. And again, I'm all about having as much vegetable as you want, but when you're eating foods that are less calorically dense, less calorie dense, you really want to give more of the plate to starches. I'm okay with people going down to 1/3 of the plate, but I don't like for only 1/4 of the plate to be starch, because when we're using fat as an accent, if only 1/4 of the plate is starch and I do a calorie count, those meals are often only about 250 or 300 calories, and that is not enough for anyone for a meal. So that's when people find themselves looking for food in between meals. They start to get into the trail mixes or something else, and then they're like, this isn't working for me, like this isn't sustainable. So having that starch as a good 1/3 to 1/2 of the plate is totally appropriate. It's not too much, I promise. Even if somebody's familiar with carb counting for diabetes, if you have 2 servings of carbs on that portion of your plate, that's 2 servings. A fruit is 3. Even if you choose beans or lentils for your protein, which makes it 4, that's still not excessive on your carbohydrates if you're trying to carb count for diabetes. So I promise it's not out of the ballpark. It just looks different than some of the other plate methods. But I want to keep fat as more of an accent so that that helps with insulin resistance and weight management a little bit better. All right. Oh, I love it. Dr. Levy sent a picture of a shirt that says Starchivore. I need that shirt, Dr. Levy. Just you can send me where you got it. I love it. I'm such a Starchivore. It's so true. And, you know, I think I may have mentioned this. I'm certified in plant-based nutrition. I've gone to extensive conferences and trainings, and all of the big plant-based doctors that are using this approach in clinics where they're reversing diseases of various kinds, they all continue to communicate the same message, that starch carbohydrates need to be 70 to 80% of our caloric intake. And fats and proteins only 10 to 15 a piece. So this is, trust me, it's research-based, I promise. Yes, Shawnee.
Can you substitute like a meal, maybe like a lunch, for if you did a smoothie that has, you know, vegetables in the fruit and maybe plant-based, like coconut water or something like that?
Okay.
Would that be considered like a meal?
So she's asking if a smoothie can be replaced, or a meal replacement. And I tend to have mixed feelings on that on a regular basis. Like once in a while, it's better than eating nothing, right? But our body's job, one of our body's jobs with food, is to take solid food and liquid and kind of not totally liquefy it, but digest it down for us. So when we eat things that are already blended or pureed for us, it is pre-digested food, as I call it. And so We actually don't use as many calories during the digestion of those meals, so we will absorb more calories from liquefied food without expending as many digesting it. And because it is already liquefied, it's going to run through the GI system faster, so it doesn't keep us full as longer. So people often find that they're still wanting to snack and graze. Because if you think about eating an apple, you know, we take a bite of that apple and then we do what to that bite? We chew it, right? So we've got, and the whole digestive system is muscular. So it's exercising, so to speak, as we digest, and then we swallow it, and the esophagus pushes it into the stomach, and the stomach starts to do its thing and secretes acids and gets other organs involved. So it's more of this, like, it's more effort. Part of our metabolism comes from digesting food. So the more whole and intact our foods are, the easier it is for weight management purposes in the long run. But then it also, that intact fiber is really important for healthy GI function too. And it feeds friendly bacteria and helps with constipation and all that stuff. So once in a while, it's fine. But I often use smoothies as a supplement to a meal. Like I'll have oatmeal with some smoothie, or 6 or 8 ounces of a smoothie with my lunch. But again, if you're in a situation where it's either a smoothie or nothing, I would do it. Good questions. Any other questions? You guys doing okay? Are these tools helpful? Are they, you feel like you've given you some direction? Okay, and then the next page after that is just a sample menu. So I've given you a couple breakfast options and a lunch or dinner template. And my last thing that I will say, and then we'll just kind of open it up to questions and let you guys socialize, is probably the biggest. It's not like a secret because it's what we do with animal-based meals that makes them craveable. But I think that people often forget this when they switch to plant-based eating. What do we do to meats to make them craveable? Seasonings, sauces, right? Nobody thinks that like boiled chicken is the best thing they've ever had, or, right? Like we don't ever just grill something plain and not do anything to it. So I want you guys to transfer a lot of those strategies and cooking techniques that you use with meat and do them to plants. If you're going to put beans on a salad, you can marinate beans in a container, put some garlic powder, onion powder, a little pinch of salt and pepper. Or if you're going to do a taco salad, marinate the beans in some of your salsa. If you're going to cook tofu, marinate it. Use herbs and spices, rub blends, the dry rub seasonings, all of those same things you use to make meats taste good, apply those techniques to plants. Because that's when people get like, this is not for me. It's bland. I can't eat any more brown rice and broccoli. And I'm like, well, what are you doing to the brown rice? Let's just cook it in water. Throw some garlic cloves, dice up some onion and throw it in there. Cook it in veggie stock or throw some bay leaves, just get creative with it. And so the last handout that I have for you guys today is all about sauces, dressings, dips that are no oil, and most of them low fat. So the fat that's in them is coming from avocados, cashews, things like that. They're whole food fat. But that's really what's going to give your food flavor. If you look at a condiment like a stir fry sauce and you think, oh gosh, that has 350 or 400 milligrams of sodium per serving, that's too much. Look at what it says a serving is. Some stir fry sauces, it's a 1/4 cup. Well, if you're only using a 1/4 cup of stir fry sauce for an entire tofu and veggie stir fry, that 400 milligrams of sodium now is spread out between how many servings. It's not necessarily a deal breaker. So don't get scared away just by what the sodium. I know there's some rules out there you see that's like, don't buy anything with more than 200 milligrams of sodium. But I think we need to apply some common sense and go, yeah, this has 200 milligrams of sodium in this amount, but I'm going to use this amount to make 6 portions. So that's obviously then not a problem at all. So the sauces piece, the seasoning, making it flavorful and exciting is really what makes or breaks a person's desire to do this long term, in my experience. They think everything just has to be a bland salad with steamed vegetables all the time. They don't do it. They just don't do it. So that's like me going over all the tools that I brought today and giving you guys some tips of how to get started. And now I'd love to answer any questions.
My problem is I can do this at breakfast. I don't like oatmeal.
Ah, okay.
And so that's why I asked what with the smoothie, I was thinking, okay, if I could do vegetables,
Sure.
peanut butter or something
Yeah.
like that. Because I don't know how I'm gonna get through breakfast and I don't really wanna eat a salad. for
Right.
breakfast. So,
Yeah, there's some fun options, some things that come to my mind. She's wondering about breakfast options. What could she eat for breakfast? She doesn't care for oatmeal. So maybe some whole grain toast, can rotate through these different things with a thin layer of peanut butter, some sliced bananas, and then maybe some smoothie alongside that. Sweet potatoes for breakfast are actually amazing. Either the orange ones or Japanese sweet potatoes, which are white flesh inside. They are like, I don't even know how to describe them. They're fluffy inside. They're not like the stringy, like the orange ones can be a little stringy inside. They're like the consistency of a Yukon Gold potato, but they're crazy sweet. So you can roast some sweet potatoes on a weekend and then in the morning just warm one up. You can do some sliced banana on it, a drizzle of peanut butter, some cinnamon. That would be amazing. I've had that in the mornings. A whole, like a brown rice cake with almond butter or peanut butter or whatever, or fruit, you can do those. And tofu scramble is something that I do a lot in place of scrambled eggs. So you buy a firm tofu, works great for this, and you just put it in the skillet and start breaking it apart with your spatula. And then I add onion powder, garlic powder, something called nutritional yeast, which I can show you what that looks like if you're not familiar. It has a little bit of a cheesy flavor and it's a seasoning. And then to make it a little more yellow, I add a little turmeric. And you cook it down so firm tofu is still in water. It's not quite as mushy as other tofus, but you know how some people like their scrambled eggs a little more wet and some like it a little more firm. You kind of play around with tofu that way too and cook it to the consistency that you like. And then you could do a tofu scramble with breakfast potatoes, just like you would scrambled eggs, right? So there really is a lot more. That's just a handful of options, but I know how it feels. You're like, break out of the mold. And I don't know if it's just cooked oatmeal that you don't love, but if you like granola, you might like rolled oats eaten as a cold cereal. So you eat the rolled oats raw. It's called muesli. And you just add dried fruit. Thanks for coming. You add dried fruit, cinnamon, your plant milk of choice, and you just eat it like a cold cereal. It's what I had for breakfast today. I put dried blueberries, rolled oats, but it's not granola. It's just old-fashioned Quaker Oats, but you eat it like granola in the sense that you eat it like a cold cereal. But it just doesn't have all that added sugar and oil that granola has. But if you might not like cooked oatmeal, but you might like muesli. Yeah. Good questions. Any other questions? Do you guys feel at all like this is approachable?
Yeah, I'm excited.
Which approach feels the most like inviting to you? Taking it step by step or just using the meal planning tool and jumping right in? No, it's okay. Awesome.
You're always kind of like lower carb, and so to be able to like kind of flip that over, it's like is much more doable.
Great.
To do it this way.
And when you think about the structure of our channel, there's 3 options. So I really appreciate how you spend a lot of your time focusing on what to add and what to take away, because participation options just focus on something. I think it's like less than 50% of Americans get the recommended
Right. Right.
So just focusing on the second option is your plant-based packet, which you can and then the third option is I really got home and I just want to go for it. So 3 options are really simple.
Right.
I think that's empowering and
That'd be great. Yeah, so on Facebook, I have a closed group. It's called Plant Strong and Fit. Anyone can ask to join that group. It's not, I actually have a few questions I ask people to answer before they can join. One is, are you capable of respecting others when their opinion is not the same as your own? And are you aware this is not a vegans only group? So we are really trying to be inclusive. And, my support group here at Kaiser is the same idea, where there's some people there that have been vegan for decades, but there's other people who are like the gentleman in my class today who are maybe 70, 80% there. They're just trying to improve their health and impact a disease. And but they're just not able or ready to go in 100%. And the cool thing is, I don't know if anyone knows who Dr. T. Colin Campbell is, but he co-authored the China study. He's sort of, I call him the godfather of plant-based nutrition. I don't think he would probably like for me to call him that, but it's what I call him. And we hosted him in Roseville, I think it was a couple years ago, and I've heard him a few times live. He's like in his 80s, you guys. He still tours the world talking about plant-based nutrition. He's a nutritional biochemist from Cornell. He's just amazing. And he even said that there isn't any need for a person to be plant-based more than 90% of the time when we're not trying to reverse, like Dr. Esselstyn's work for heart disease. That's a different story. That is really using food therapeutically, very low fat, no oils, 100% plant-based, because that's what works to reverse heart disease. But when we've already got, decent health, we're not trying to reverse something that significant, even 90% is fine. And if, the average person who eats 3 meals a day, 7 days a week, that's 21 meals a week. So 2 meals that are not whole food plant-based a week is still 90% plant-based. 4 meals is 80%, right? So that's usually how I present it to my patients, so that they don't feel like it has to be this whole strict all or nothing thinking.
I think one of the biggest kind of things the mindset that's
Yes. Yes.
Even
Absolutely.
Activity tracker for our challenge, which is what you'll get. So part of the challenge, starting on the weekly activity tracker, there's about 10 activities per week. You do at least 4 of them. Just email them and say, wellness, hey, I did it. You get $50 per hour prize. We have a prize, so basically everyone who's entering will get something. And they're quick activities like we did last year, just watching a video, doing some meal prepping, giving you, kudos and prizes that you're already going to be doing your best. And it's all based on your honor. So I'll make sure to include that.
Yeah.
I think that, especially my sister, I have a twin sister, and she is just since she was a child, even though in her time she had this challenge and she's on yoga diet and she's doing a keto now. And it's just so hard. I think this is just such a huge. It is amazing. I think Hannah was taking stories or something.
Yeah.
A lot of
Right.
forward on your
I've had several patients like this over the years, and that's what I love about my support group is I get to routinely hear, these stories. I think that, understanding that high fat intake creates insulin resistance on a cellular level is powerful, and helping to explain to patients how that happens, how it can cause fatty liver and things like that. But also animal protein creates oxidative stress on the cells, and that causes them not to use glucose optimally either. So that's how cutting back on both the fat and the animal protein can have such a dramatic impact on insulin sensitivity, which matters not just for diabetes, type conditions, but there's other conditions associated with insulin resistance. When I look up information about dementia, it's often written about as type 3 diabetes or insulin resistance of the brain. So preventing insulin resistance in our bodies is something that we all, should be aware of. And so just to kind of throw some numbers out there, if we're keeping fat at 15% or less of the diet, which is what researchers who, talk about this, Mastering Diabetes is a great resource for this. 15% or less of the diet for women, practically what that looks like is about 10 grams of fat per meal on an 1,800 calorie diet. And for men, it's up to 12 to 15. So that can just give you a point of reference that as you're looking at labels in the store and you start to look at that oil-based salad dressing and you're like, 14 grams of fat in 2 tablespoons, and you've got your budget of 10 in mind, you're like, oh, I could choose something better, right? And that kind of speaks to what I was talking about with Shawnee at the beginning, that reading labels can be powerful, but if you don't know your personal nutrition needs, it's like going to the store looking at price tags with no clue what you've got in the bank. How do you even interpret the information? How do you know if it applies, how it applies to you? Because this box of quinoa, the nutrition facts look the same, whether a 2-year-old is looking at it, I'm looking at it, or a 6'5" basketball player is looking at it. Serving sizes are not saying you have to eat this much of this food. It's a way to do math. You have to know, how many calories do I need? How many carbs do I need? How much fat do I need? And that way you can interpret what's on the label. Well, if you have access to a dietitian, that will help. But even there's just, there's some decent, I think even USDA might have some good tools and resources. One thing I would caution you about is if you download a tracking app, put in the macronutrients I gave you, like 70% carbs, 15% fat and protein, because all of them that I've experienced are not accurate. They're recommending 50% carbs, 25% 20% protein, 30% fat. They're all over the place. So once you dial those in, then if you track your food, which, tracking food is not for everyone. I don't recommend it indefinitely. I think it can be a useful tool for a window of time, just like tracking your spending, where you see where you're overspending. But very few people have I found where tracking long-term is a healthy practice mentally and emotionally. But if it can help you stay focused and you look at it as objective data, then it can be good. All right. Well, I know people have to get back to work. Sure. Thank you guys for joining. Hope I didn't miss any questions. Have a great day. Thanks for being here. Bye.
Jamie, I just wanted to say that I've been doing the things before, that's like a lot of reading, that's like plant-based. It's been on my heart.